So if you happen to have seen any of my best budget smartphone roundouts from the past year or so, you've probably noticed that I've got a bit of a stiffy for the Motorola Moto G8 Power. Motorola's Bargainous blower wasn't just a classic because of its insanely good battery life, although that was awesome. It was an all-round gem, offering a smooth and satisfying everyday experience for about a fifth of the cost of the cheapest iPhone. Well, it's boner time all over again because Motorola has just revamped the Moto G8 Power fresh for 2020, and this bad boy here is the result, the Moto G8 Power, or just the Moto G Power if you live in the States, because I think they missed a generation or something. You've got a fresh quad lens rear camera, upgraded specs, and that same bloody massive 5000 mAh battery crammed inside. But is the Moto G8 Power just as essential for bargain smartphone hunters as the previous gen? Well, I've been using the Moto G8 Power as my full-time personal handset for the past week or so here's my in-depth review. And for more on the latest greatest tech and the best budget blowers around, please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! So, as far as the looks go, the Moto G8 Power doesn't really do much to stand out. You get a similar plastic finish to many budget blowers with shiny surfaces that do love a bit of grease and grime, although the two colour options are dark enough so that muck doesn't really show up too easily. The only design feature that really sets the G8 Power apart from other Motos is that rather subtle linear pattern on the back end. It's definitely nowhere near as eye-catching or attention-arousing as the design of the likes of the Realme handsets, for instance, which are slightly psychedelic, but if you prefer something that's a bit more smart and subtle, then definitely job done. Unlike most modern mobiles, the Moto G8 Power is a proper monster with a 6.4-inch display, so that nifty one-handed mode definitely comes in very handy indeed, as does the ability to swipe down the notifications bar using the fingerprint sensor. With that 5000 mAh battery and all the other stuff crammed in here, the Moto G8 Power definitely has a proper heft to it as well. At just a shade under 200 grams, definitely gives weedy buggers like me a proper workout every time you pick it up. The IP52 water repellent finish means that you can still message your besties in the piss and rain, but if you want to keep your Moto G8 Power in pristine condition, you may want to keep on the bundled condom cover. That glossy surface scratches up a storm if you don't. Flip the Moto G8 Power around and you've got yourself a gorgeous 6.4-inch IPS display, which is great for media lovers on a budget. Those punchy Full HD visuals are colourful and pleasingly crisp, while the top brightness can counter any kind of irritating glare. You do have a selfie cam intruding on the action somewhat, but it's just a dinky wee pinhole jobby nudged away in the corner, so it's barely noticeable even when you're watching something in a bit of full screen mode. And even better, you get a proper stereo speaker set up here on the Moto G8 Power, something that's pretty bloody rare at this sort of price point. The clarity remains pretty strong even on that top volume, which will definitely do the job and cut through any kind of background noise, even in a very noisy household. And it sort of offers a little bit of directional support when you're gaming, although I wouldn't rely on it too heavily. This definitely ain't no rogue phone too. I did have one slightly troublesome moment with the Moto G8 Power speakers a couple of days back though, where the bottom one suddenly sounded like it was submerged in water and the top one stopped working entirely. I honestly thought the entire phone was buggered, but thankfully just a quick reboot sorted it out, and touch a lot of wood, it hasn't resurfaced. You've got a tasty bit of Dolby audio tuning via the Moto Audio app, and on the smart audio setting this will tweak the sound to best suit whatever you're up to at the time, via those blasters or connected headphones or whatever you're listening through. And yeah, if you don't want to use the phone's speakers, then good news, Motorola has not ditched the headphone jack just yet. You've also got Bluetooth 5 support here on Moto G8 Power if you want to connect some wireless headphones to listen to music on the go. I find the connection could be a tiny bit patchy at times. If you've gone through a busy area like a train station, an airport, something like that, it can be a little bit breaking up in places, but overall not too bad. And it's also worth bearing in mind that if you want to use contactless payments via the likes of Google Pay, you'll have to look elsewhere because there's no NFC support here on the Moto G8 Power, despite the fact that considerably cheaper handsets do manage to cram it in there. Bum fudge. As always though, Motorola can be depended upon to serve up a deliciously clean stock version of Android, and yeah, it's a fresh bit of Android 10 action. So you get all those great bits like the dark mode, gesture navigation and enhanced privacy controls all stuffed inside. As per standard, you also get the Moto Experiences app on board the Moto G8 Power as well, and this just adds a whole bunch of bonus stuff like the aforementioned one-handed mode. And the bulk of these additions are genuinely useful. For instance, I love flipping the G8 Power over to activate Do Not Disturb and silence any calls, or doing that karate chop thing to activate the torch, complete with the obligatory Bruce Lee impressions. Performance is perfectly respectable too, as this Moto phone rocks the same Snapdragon 665 platform as most of its similarly priced rivals, backed by 4 gigs of RAM. Of course, you will spy the occasional stutter and stammer here on the Moto G8 Power, and sometimes it's pretty glaringly obvious as well. One time I was shooting photos in the camera app, I wanted to switch to video mode, but it took about 4 or 5 seconds to transition, by which point, of course, inevitably your cat, kid, whatever has stopped doing whatever cute thing you wanted to record in the first place. But you can happily blast through a game like PUBG Mobile with a respectable enough frame rate as long as you keep those detail levels pretty low. The screen response rate is typically a bit iffy, pretty standard for a cheaper smartphone like this, but that didn't stop me from capping a few mofos in my online sessions. And frankly, if even I can make it to the final 10 in PUBG with this thing, then anyone can. Plus, you also have the fresh new Moto Game Time app, which allows you to quickly block notifications and incoming calls, so your savage bloodletting isn't crudely interrupted by the boss or your mum or something. Battery life is unfortunately a wee bit of a letdown here on the Moto G8 Power, not because it's bad by any means, but it's just not quite as good as the G7 Power. You still get that beefy 5000 mAh capacity cell stuffed inside, but you'll just about scrape 2 days of play between charges if you don't lean on it too much. I found over the past week that with a fair bit of media streaming, bit of camera action, stuff like that, I generally was left with around 40 to 45% of battery life remaining at the end of a day, so not quite enough to scrape through 2 full days. Kind of similar result to what I got with other budget blowers like the Oppo A9 2020. And you've also got 15-watt turbo power charging support on board, so not the nippiest round, but again pretty respectable for a budget blower. So let's finish up this Moto G8 Power review with a quick squint at that quad lens rear camera, certainly on paper at least a massive upgrade over the previous generation. You don't actually get the same camera setup as the G8 Plus here. Rather, it is a 16 megapixel primary shooter sat snugly alongside an ultra-wide angle and telephoto alternative, plus there's a 2 megapixel macro lens thrown in for good measure. A very generous setup indeed, and while these multi-lens configurations are actually fairly common on smartphones around the sort of £200 price point these days, very few of those budget blows throw a telephoto lens into the mix. Now here on the G8 Power you don't get any of that clever pixel binning tech unlike the G8 Plus, so high contrast scenes do prove a bit more of a problem, and those low light conditions serve up less detail with more noise creeping into your shots. And sadly the G8 Power is lacking a dedicated night mode, something that was found on the G8 Plus. That basically means you're stuck using the flash if things get a bit too ambient. But still, if the light is on your side, you'll get fine enough results here. Occasionally colours can look a bit drab, but more often than not those hues are naturally reproduced, especially when the background isn't particularly bright, while Motorola's AI tool can straighten up any wonky looking pics. The 2x optical zoom from that telephoto lens gives you a closer view of the action, although using this on a moving subject does occasionally deliver a blurry photo. And that ultra-wide angle effort works as expected, with only slightly warmer colour reproduction overall. And you do get a fairly decent selection of bonus modes here on the Moto G8 Power, even if that night mode has done a runner. The macro mode, for instance, works well enough, although as usual you'll have to get the distance just right, otherwise your results will be a bit of a blurry fuck up. And I still love the cheesy spot colour mode too, which can produce arty-farty stuff like this. And overall the results with that 16 megapixel front facing selfie camera are about the same as what you get from the rear lenses. High contrast is again a bit of a bugger, but otherwise you'll fare well, and you can have the same great range of portrait effects in there too, including this one here, which I've decided to call, oh my god, I've somehow crossed over into the abyss, and it feels just like being at a Coldplay concert. As for video, well, with the rear cam you can capture footage at up to 4K resolution with very respectable audio pickup. Detail levels are good, but colours do appear rather warm, which is pretty standard. And image stabilisation is next to non-existent at that Ultra HD setting, so you'll want to keep pretty still. Overall, I've got to say I still prefer the camera tech on the G8 Plus over the G8 Power. It's better for your everyday snaps, despite the added flexibility that the Power throws in. And that's my full review of the Motorola Moto G8 Power after a week of use. Still a solid all-round handset, but there is strong rivalry these days from the likes of the Realme 5 Pro, the Oppo A9 2020 and Xiaomi's Redmi handsets. Here on TechSpert I do try to review as many of the latest budget affordable smartphones as possible, so you can check those out here on the channel. And I also try and round up my favourite budget smartphones around the sort of 200, 300, 400 pound price point, and also the best for camera tech and things like that. So go check those out if you want some ideas of some alternatives to the Moto G8 Power. It'd be great to hear your thoughts down below. If you've actually got the G8 Power now, give us your own mini review. It'd be great to hear from you. And please do plug subscribe, ding that notifications bell, and have yourselves a lovely week, people. Cheers everyone, love you!